Nick Whalen, John McKechnie here with you. You're listening to the betting edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Week 9, John. Public hanging around these last couple of weeks. As we know, the public got crushed earlier in the season, but coming off a decent week, the 10 most popular sides went 5-5 against the number last week at DraftKings. Over the last 3 weeks now, public sides 29, 13, and 1 ATS. We're talking almost 70% there. During that span, teams that have at least 66% of the tickets, 21, 6-1 against the number. Try to keep it rolling this week. And we once again have a healthy mix, I would say, of big numbers and tight spreads this week. 5 teams favored by at least a touchdown, 5 games sitting under a field goal right now.
Yeah, it's a fascinating board. You know, we're at that point in the season now. Like half of it's in the oven already, right? So I mean that we're getting a pretty solid idea of who these teams are. But you know, there are other teams that it's tougher to get a read on. I mean, Thursday night's game is obviously going to be a bit tricky to sort out. We won't stick on that too long. But, you know, the Dolphins, so confident in them last week with Tua returning. The offense, you know, kind of held up its end of the bargain. But the Cardinals, you know, once again, kind of finding a way to come back in that one, similar to how they did against the Chargers the week prior. You know, we're into week 2 of the Jameis Winston experience in Cleveland. So that's a bit of an unknown in its own right. So you got to kind of be able to be flexible, be agile with your analysis of these teams. And even though we do have a decent amount of sample, things really do change on a week-to-week basis here.
Yeah, I want to talk about that Cardinals-Bears game later in the show. I can tell you it did not make my card. It's much closer to a stay away for me, but kind of a fascinating matchup there. I don't really understand how the Cardinals continue to win these games. They're currently sitting in first right now in the NFC West. Certainly doesn't feel like it, but that's one of the more stacked up divisions right now across the NFL. John, we each pick 3 games we want to talk about every single week. I always let you lead it off. We're not breaking that tradition this week. Where are you taking us first?
All right, so we are going to break down what I would guess, knowing you, might be a stay away of the week, potentially. This is the Tennessee versus New England game. It's really tough to figure both of these teams out. We're looking at Tennessee as a 3.5-point favorite in this one. You know, we don't know exactly what's up with Drake May at this point. We don't really feel like the Titans should be favored in almost any setup, even with them being at home. I think that's kind of a fair summation there. But, and, you know, 3.5, I think you're just kind of general. If I'm looking at the board and, you know, you have the hook attached to the Titans there, I understand the hesitancy there. But I think people will be kind of excited about New England after last week and their victory over the Jets, and that will kind of give them a little bit of maybe a false sense of confidence. And you know, the sharp guys I was listening to last week, they didn't argue that the Titans shouldn't have lost that game. Like they didn't go that far, but they did say that it was a bit of an inflated final in favor of the Lions. And I do tend to agree with that. The Titans were keeping up with them kind of to a shocking degree early on in that game. You know, that was one of the 4 games on the old quad box, and it's like, how are the Titans not already getting boat raced? Of course, they eventually got boat raced, but for a minute there, like we didn't even expect them to hang around, and they did, at least for a little bit there. So I think it's just, if nothing else, it's an interesting game to kind of unpack, and I definitely wanted to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think the Titans have played 2 similar games each of the previous 2 weeks against Detroit and Buffalo, where they get off to decent starts, right? I mean, they were up 2 scores. They were up 10-0 in that Buffalo game. Of course, then let the Bills reel off 34 unanswered. They were kind of going back and forth with Detroit early on. I would never, ever argue that Tennessee should have won that game. You know, they ended up losing by, 5 scores? But that was an all-time anomaly game. The Lions had 9 net passing yards in the first half. You know, I had to dig in on StatHead on this game because it was such an anomaly. No team has ever lost the yardage battle by more than 150 yards, which is what happened in this game to Detroit, and won by at least 30 points in the history of the NFL. I mean, it was 416 to 225, almost a 200-yard difference in terms of total yardage. Titans ripped off 6 yards per play and lost this game by 38. The Lions also became the first team ever to score 50 with less than 90 passing yards on the day. Jared Goff finished at 85. So it's like, on one hand, like, I guess the Titans defense kind of played okay, but at the same time, you know, they gave up 262 yards worth of kick and punt return. Special teams continues to be an issue, as it's been all year for Tennessee. I mean, the Lions, it's not like they played poorly. They were just in plus yardage situations, like extremely plus yardage situations that entire game. I mean, they had at one point a 4-drive span where they scored a touchdown from 12 yards out, 22 yards out as far as where these drives began. They had a punt return touchdown and then a 26-yard touchdown drive. So I don't really come out of this game feeling better about Tennessee, but I think the Tennessee offense has low-key been decent the last couple of weeks. And I think you're right about New England being slightly overvalued. Like beating the Jets, I don't think that really means anything right now. The Jets have name value. Some people are still kind of clinging to this preseason expectation with the Jets, but I don't view that as some sort of monumental win for New England. Now, the quarterback situation on both sides is really interesting here. It's like if you're taking the Tennessee side of things, one, does it matter if it's Levis or if it's Rudolph? And two, do you prefer Brissett or do you prefer Drake May, who remains in concussion protocol?
And one last thing on speaking of anomalies, there are some stats coming out after the Patriots win last week where basically not since the actual Hail Mary game had a certain set of circumstances occurred in a game where I think New England had like fewer than 250 yards from scrimmage. Yep. The Jets didn't turn it over. The Jets still found a way to lose. So like pretty much everything that the Jets did on Sunday normally results in a win, but it just didn't this time around. Now, as it pertains to the quarterback situation, if I'm on Tennessee, and I think I am in this spot, I prefer to have Mason Rudolph back there because as much as I kind of was drinking the Kool-Aid on Will Levis, I know, right? As much as I was drinking the Kool-Aid on Will Levis coming into the season, it just seems like bad Levis is kind of here to stay, at least for the time being. And I don't know if this coaching staff is the one to fix him. I think he still has something in there, but Mason Rudolph, a lot more of a steady presence back there at quarterback. And on the New England side, I would rather face Jacoby Brissett. I think that, the sample that he put forth outside of week one, when he didn't even really have to do a whole lot, it was the Ramondre Stevenson show. He kind of, to quote the late great Dennis Green, like he is who we thought he was, like he just is a very sub replacement level quarterback. Like if you're ranking them all, like he's outside the top 32. So ideally, if I'm on Tennessee here, I'm seeing Rudolph back there and I'm seeing Brissett on the other side.
All right, there we go. Tennessee -3.5. John McKechnie's first pick of the week. John, I am going to a divisional game in the NFC East. I'm taking the Commanders -3.5 on the road at the New York Giants. There are some 4s out there, but I'm seeing 3.5 still at the FanDuel Sportsbook. This is such an obvious letdown spot for Washington. I want to start by acknowledging that. You have this just crazy emotional win, last second Hail Mary, probably the play of the year, one of the most memorable plays in recent memory. And I think for the average young team with a rookie quarterback, you would think, all right, this is a letdown. I think Jaden Daniels has kind of moved past that. Like he's just been so consistent week to week. I mean, playing through injury against a really good defense last week. Washington consistently able to move the ball, excuse me, on that Bears defense, not consistently able to punch in those drives, but I think that changes this week against the Giants. The 2 games this year where Washington has really struggled in the red zone were last week, and then that early season game against the New York Giants. That was the no kicker game, as you may recall, for New York. I think that comes around this week. I think Washington will have a lot more success, once they get into those situations. I think they'll be able to move the ball just as effectively, if not more effectively, than they did last week. I know the Giants are way up there in terms of pressure and sacks on the year. Jaden Daniels' mobility is huge here. His ability to evade those sacks, not take negative plays. I also think the Giants are in a tough spot here, coming off of what I would call a dream-crushing loss last week. They're in the NFC. They're out of it at this point. Like, you needed to win that game last week. I think they realized their season is essentially over at this point, and Washington obviously just continues to ascend. I don't think Tyrone Tracy is going to be out there. He suffered a concussion on Monday night against Pittsburgh. I actually think that matters. I mean, to me, he looks dramatically better than Devin Singletary and really kind of gives them an added dimension on the ground. So if he's not out there, that's a big loss. Giants, by the way, are underdogs for the 24th game in a row. That seems insane. Carolina actually has a longer streak than that going on right now, but this is a team that's just been beaten down over the last couple of years. Giants are averaging under 8 points per game at home this season. And I know the Commanders are on the road, but they actually have the rest advantage here with New York playing on Monday night. So I think this number could be a point higher. I have a lot of faith in this Washington team.
And 24 games. So some quick mental math. Were they like a slight favorite against the Cowboys in the season opener last year? Like that's kind of like the last line of demarcation I can think of, because they obviously weren't favored in either of those playoff games the season prior. So maybe the books gave them some benefit of the doubt in that season opener. But yeah, since then, dogs, and largely deservedly so. Washington just needs to be careful of the pass rush. That's really the one thing that kind of scares you about the Giants. Dexter Lawrence is like total game wrecker up there, and they've got some other pieces that are pretty interesting off the edge. So as long as they can contain that, but luckily, like you said, Jaden Daniels, a guy that can move around in the pocket, and for them to get it done last week when not everything was going perfectly right, I think that really was kind of that gut check moment for this team. And maybe, I mean, I don't know how many times you can say that a Washington win was a springboard, because I feel like we've had so many occasions of that, dating back to like the Bengals game really on that Monday nighter. But I think that, they continue to kind of cement their legitimacy here, and I think that they will continue to do so against the Giants.
Yeah, I think they're a true good team. I don't see this as like a fluky 6-2. I don't see it as this is just a fun story. Let's see how long this can ride. Like I really think this is a good team, man. I think a lot of their wins this season, that Bengals win, it still looks good to me. I know Cincinnati hasn't been firing on all cylinders, but putting 38 on that team. I mean, they blew out the first placed Arizona Cardinals back in week 4. They blew out the Browns. Even just hanging with that Baltimore team in week 6, I still think that's kind of a feather in your cap type of win. And 18 points last week. I mean, that's kind of been the anomaly for this Washington team that had been on a run of 30 plus prior to that. So I just think they're a dramatically better team, and I'm going on that side. So that's where we go for our first game. John, what about your second game that you want to talk about?
We will stick in the NFC East. We'll go to Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Eagles are hosting the Jacksonville Jaguars. A lot of kind of interesting trends at play in this one. Philly's been bad as a home favorite, as a big home favorite specifically. 0-4 in their last 4 home games when favored by 7 or more points. The counterpoint to that would be that Jacksonville has been really bad on the road this season. Yep. Lawrence's numbers the splits are pretty drastic between at home versus on the road. 5.8 yards per attempt on the road. That's not going to get it done, not against his Philadelphia defense. So I think that this is a spot where Philadelphia kind of breaks that trend. I know it's a little bit scary to hang 7 in a hook against almost anybody. I know the Jags are, feeling a little bit better, but they just, it was such a, you win the battle, but you lose the war last week with all the receiver injuries. I mean, it's brutal. I hated to see what happened to Christian Kirk. Brian Thomas obviously getting dinged up in that one as well. So I just fear that Lawrence's performance already on the road being shaky as it is with the full strength supporting cast, that getting, washed under a little bit. And now, I mean, I like Parker Washington, but he can't be the engine of your passing game. Right. So this is a really tricky spot. And I think Philadelphia, they're starting to convince me more. They're a team that I was leery of coming into the season, among the elite teams. And I think for them to go into Cincinnati the way that they did last week and kind of wreck shop, I do like that to continue this week at home.
Teams do tend to wreck shop against the Jags, John. So I'm not gonna fight you on that one. This one is a stay away for me with the hook. Like I'm still kind of skeptical of this Philly team. I know last week was convincing, but they continue to get off to slow starts every single week. They have not scored a single point in the first quarter this season. That is insane. Not a single point. And it feels like they start every game by giving up, a long scoring drive, a 17-play drive to begin the game last week for Cincinnati. I mean, that was a close game going into half, and that the Bengals kind of did what they do every week, which is run into a wall at some point and then just kind of completely unravel. But Philly's the better side here, no question about it. Jacksonville's banged up, but I will say the Jags defense is finally healthy. They have Tyson Campbell back, they have Foye Oluokun back. That really matters. I thought the defense, the numbers weren't great last week, but I thought actually played a pretty decent game in what should have been a good spot for Green Bay. You don't love to see Malik Willis coming in and killing you with a 55-yarder at the end of the game. For what it's worth, Andre Sisco said he cramped up on that play. That's why Jaden Reed was so open. Tough time to cramp up in that spot. But that's the story of the Jag season, right? I mean, it's giving up plays like that. It's, fumbling inside the 5-yard line. It's Lawrence throwing a bad pick after you get an interception on Jordan Love. And it just feels like those plays are happening every single week for Jacksonville, unless they're playing, I don't know, the Colts or the Patriots. So with the injuries at receiver, I think it's tough to argue here. We'll see if Brian Thomas plays. I think there's some level of optimism. To me, that's a 50-50. They could get ETN back this week. We'll see if it's even his job anymore. Gabe Davis, I think, is going to play. That's probably a plus for Philadelphia at this point. But yeah, losing Christian Kirk is huge, man. That's Trevor Lawrence's guy in this offense. So, all right, you're taking the Eagles. You're pairing that with Tennessee. John, I'm looking at the Buffalo Bills, another divisional game here. This one in the AFC East. I really like Buffalo this week. You can get them at 5.5 at home at the FanDuel Sportsbook. There are some 6s out there as well. This is a matchup that the Bills have dominated. It's a matchup that Josh Allen has dominated. He is 7-1 straight up in his career against Tua, 5-2-1 against the number. That is the most profitable opposing quarterback that Josh Allen has faced in his career. Miami, 2-12 straight up in their last 14 games in Buffalo. With Josh Allen at quarterback, they're 0-7 straight up in Buffalo. Tua, of course, always better at home. This Dolphins team, John, part of it is the Bills are rolling right now. They feel like they could get off to these slow starts. They hit the gas, and all of a sudden they're up 3 scores. So that's part of it. But the other part of it is I don't think this Miami team is that good. I think they thought that they could just sleepwalk through that game last week against Arizona. All the comments leading up to it were back. Tua's back in. Get me back in your fantasy lineups. I think when you think of this Miami team, you're still hearkening back to like weeks 1 through 5 of last season when it felt like they were a threat to score 50 in any given week. And since then, the offense has just kind of been on the steady decline. The running game has not been consistent. They had no ground game whatsoever when Tua was out. They were struggling early in the season, even when Tua was healthy. And I think you're getting a Buffalo team that's playing with a ton of confidence. You're getting a Josh Allen who's been arguably the best player in the league so far this season. I think we see more Amari Cooper involvement this week. And I don't know if Miami is necessarily capable right now of playing these shootout games. If you think this is going to be a 33-31 type of game, like if Buffalo's putting up 30 plus, I don't trust Miami to keep up. I really don't, which sounds crazy, but this offense has just not shown that ability so far this season. So I really like this spot for Buffalo. I think 5.5 is a really nice number at home.
Yeah, and I think this Buffalo defense can, historically, like you said, Tua 0-7 against the Bills up there. I think that it's a defense that can give Tua some trouble. And I mean, this offense for Buffalo continues to, kind of add dimensions to itself. I mean, it's not just that Amari Cooper is getting his feet wet within this offense and is going to continue to be a big factor there, but I think Keon Coleman's kind of starting to arrive. And I think that when you add like another piece of weaponry there, and Khalil Shakir is like as consistent as it gets from the slot right now. I mean, that you give Josh Allen that much weaponry and the run game clicking along pretty nicely between Cook and Ray Davis. I just don't think that Miami, like you said, really has that same offensive cachet that it did early last season to where they can hang in this spot. Miami famously got completely boat raced by the Bills early in the season in Buffalo last year. I'm not saying it's going to be the exact same, but I do like Buffalo pretty strongly in this spot.
Yeah, I think there's a big line of scrimmage advantage here for the Bills, really on both sides, but especially on offense. We saw Miami hold Arizona to like 80 rushing yards last week. That's not going to happen again. I mean, the Colts ran for well over 150 on them. The Patriots ran for over 150. The Titans ran for over 140. I know some of the metrics like this Miami defense, but you also got to look at the schedule, right? It's like even when Tua was out and they were struggling, it's like you're playing Tennessee, you're playing New England, you're playing the Colts with Richardson. And the fact that they weren't able to outscore this Arizona team, the 30th ranked defense in the NFL last week. I mean, this is a big level up in competition, and trying to do that on the road in Buffalo, I do not like the chances for the Miami Dolphins. So that's where I'm going with my second game. John, your third and final game. Where are you taking us?
Well, as per usual, if Baltimore's favored by a lot, I got to talk about it because usually they're a good team to bet against in those spots, and I believe that is the case again this week. So Baltimore hosting the Denver Broncos. The Broncos 4-0 against the spread on the road this year. Sean Payton famously really good as a big underdog. It hasn't happened that much in his coaching career, but so 12 times, 9-3 against the spread in those games, covering by an average of 7 points per game. That's according to the Action Network. Lamar Jackson 4-9 against the spread at home, coming off of a loss in the most recent sample. And again, just beating the dead horse here, but anytime the Baltimore is a big favorite, I mean, anything over 7.5, and we saw it obviously last week losing outright to the Browns. We saw it earlier this season losing outright to the Raiders at home when huge favorites as well. They're just kind of hard to trust in that spot, and it's not because of the offense, it's because the defense is so shaky. I think even in Bo Nix's case here, where the progress hasn't exactly been linear. He has his good weeks, he has his bad weeks, but the defense kind of helps prop him up on his down weeks. I think that this is a really nice spot for Bo Nix. Now, if Baltimore does get Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins back, that helps as far as the secondary is concerned, but the safety play has been abysmal. I don't know if the Broncos necessarily have the tight end personnel to fully take advantage of it, but even still, there are soft spots in this back seven for the Baltimore defense that I think will keep Denver in this game. So I think, if this was 7, different conversation, but with it being 9.5, I got to take the points here with Denver.
This one I've gone back and forth on. I ultimately settled on Baltimore in my picks article. I don't feel good about it, but part of the handicap for me is this number feels too high. And, sometimes you look at a line and it feels too low or too high. Like Cowboys Falcons is one of those for me this week too, where it's like, Dallas can't run the ball. They can't stop the run. This feels like a really good matchup for Atlanta. And yet Falcons are only 2.5-point favorites at home. They've been the vastly better team this year. And it's like, maybe they're telling us something with that line. And I feel like given the run that the Broncos are on, I think they've picked up a lot of respect over the last couple of weeks, even though they've played, arguably the 2 best matchups in the NFL in Spencer Rattler and Bryce Young. And, everybody's going to be down on the Ravens. Not only do you not cover, but you lose that game straight up. And yet they're still 9.5-point favorites. And that's a little bit suspicious to me. I do wonder, is Denver catching them at the wrong time? Like, is it bad for Denver that Baltimore lost last week? I think my dumb brain is like, there's no way this could happen 2 weeks in a row.
Well, I think that's fair. I mean, we saw reports out of Baltimore yesterday that all the defensive backs were on the jugs machine after practice yesterday. And I mean, that brought joy to my heart. I mean, maybe change the
Kyle Hamilton drop. My God.
I mean, I don't know if their gloves are made by Kerrygold Irish butter or something, but I mean, it's just embarrassing stuff as far as that was concerned. So many missed opportunities from that defense last week, but I definitely understand what you mean, and I think it is like one of those things where you sit down on Monday to look at the lines, and you probably expect this one to be more 7.5. So it's a strong statement from the books that it's 9.5. And it kind of makes you think twice, makes you pause a little bit. Why would the books be so confident after Baltimore did what it did a week ago? But I still think that Denver keeps this one close. And I lean on the history of Baltimore just kind of being a poor big favorite, and also just kind of having the type of defense that lets teams hang around.
Yeah, I think the defense is the concern. The thing is, Denver will not be able to run the ball. And, ironically, they weren't able to run it on Carolina last week, which I thought was strange. I mean, Baltimore has been far and away the best run defense in the NFL. So it's like, if you're taking Denver to keep this game close, it's going to be on Bo Nix, which scares me, even against a bad secondary in Baltimore. So that's part of the equation for me as well. And I also think we see Baltimore recommit to the run. I think that's been the through line, both in the Raiders loss and in the loss last week to Cleveland. Derrick Henry carried 11 times last week, right? And you would think the Ravens would learn their lesson at some point. I felt like early in that game against Cleveland, you knew right away, maybe not that Cleveland was going to win, but you knew it was going to be a close game. Like, you're seeing all the hallmarks of like frustrated Lamar Jackson, scrambling around on a third down, whipping it downfield, incomplete, drops by Baltimore. Like, it just felt like a wheels are coming off game. And instead of committing to Derrick Henry and just kind of trying to ride, what has worked for you better than anything this season, they just kept throwing and throwing and throwing. And I think they will react to that, much like they did after the Raiders loss in week 2. They come out and run for 274 yards on the Dallas Cowboys the following week. Now, much better defense, of course, in Denver, but I do call into question the level of competition that Denver has faced, especially lately. Again, going from the Saints with nobody and the Carolina Panthers to all of a sudden playing the Baltimore Ravens on the road. It's a tough spot. So I'm going to push back on this one a little bit. It's a big enough number that I don't feel that strongly about it, but I'm not going to fight you on any of those trends, man. And the Ravens better than anybody. So you're taking the Denver Broncos to cover the 9.5 in Baltimore. For my last game, John, we're going to a total here, and I am going under 43 in the Chargers-Browns game. And this is a suspicious total. You don't often see those, but this feels high to me. It feels really high. The Chargers have not played a game this year that has even hit the 40-point mark. They are 6-1 to the under. Cleveland just scored 20+ for the first time all year last week. Chargers games going under by over 8 points per game so far this year. They're 18-6 to the under since the start of last season. If you watched any Chargers football, it makes sense, right? This team loves slowing the game down. They love sustaining drives. They'll keep riding the running game, even if it's not overly efficient. I don't think either team is really going to be able to move the ball all that effectively. The running game has really slowed down for the Chargers over the last few games. Cleveland has not been able to run the ball at all. Having Nick Chubb back, that's a nice story. He's just not been effective whatsoever. This ground game has struggled all year. Both teams top 5 in opponent third down conversion percentage. Chargers are number 1 in terms of opponent score percentage. I think a lot of things point me toward the under here, almost to the point where it feels a little overwhelming. But I think we see, kind of one of these 19-17 type of games. I don't even really have a lean on the side. Nothing would surprise me here. But I would lean Chargers. I know Cleveland's going to be really popular coming off of that win last week, but my play is the under 43.
Yeah, I think, the Jameis experience is one that is dizzying. It's a lot of fun. And he can have weeks like he did a week ago, but I think he also had a lot of dropped interceptions. I think that this week, luck kind of snaps back the other direction. I think we see some drives end via the turnover from Jameis Winston this week. And like you said, the run game not really there for Cleveland right now. No one's really running that well on the Chargers to begin with. And yeah, the Chargers just seem to not be interested in scoring a ton of points. That's just not their style for whatever reason. So I think that the under here is a nice call. That 1917, it could be the final score. It could feel like you're watching a game from 1917.
Yeah, the Chargers are just not interested in scoring. That's a big part of the handicap here. Is like I feel like they're capable of scoring more, but they're just like, no, thank you, no thanks. Yeah, we're happy to just put up our 22, 23 points. We're gonna hold you to 16 or 17, and we'll get out with a win. John, let's talk some props. And I've been using the RotoWire picks tool on our website, rotowire.com/picks. If you want the desktop version, what's really great though is the RotoWire picks app, which you can find in the Google Play Store. You can find it in the Apple App Store as well. Been getting a lot of positive feedback on that. So if you're playing the prop market at all this weekend, it gives you comparisons between all the books. If you're playing on something like Prize Picks or Underdog, the pick'em games, it'll give you some insights there, where to lean on the overs and the unders. So highly encourage you to check out RotoWire picks. That's something I always use as kind of a fail-safe. If I really like something and the picks tool feels the other way, maybe I'll back away. But go check that out. Go download it wherever you get your apps, RotoWire picks. What props are you looking at this week, John?
Yes, and I did use our picks tool in the desktop version. I need to get the app, but I had my 3 screens going, doing my prep for the show, so I figured might as well use the desktop version. But so that informs some of these, other of these straight from the gut or my own research. But Bo Nix over 218.5 passing yards. That kind of dovetails with my analysis of that game. I think the Baltimore secondary is very gettable. If Denver happens to be playing from behind here, that only raises the probability of Knicks hitting that. And 218.5, like he's kind of up and down. He's had the weeks where he's way over it. He's had weeks where he's way under it. I think this is one of those where he's over it. Give me Kyler Murray over 31.5 rushing yards. This one is at FanDuel. At other shops, it's 34.5, so a little bit of value there. I know it's a big number to ask on the ground from a quarterback, but I think that, going up against the Bears, get flushed out of the pocket enough times, I think that he'll go ahead and make some plays with his legs. Give me an Amari Cooper anytime touchdown. That's plus 175 at DraftKings. I know that last week it was a bit of a dud from him on a day where Buffalo scored a ton. I think that he gets in on the action this week. I think plus 175 is a really nice number. David Njoku, this is another one where you can find some value out there over at FanDuel specifically. His anytime touchdown is at plus 260. I think if Cleveland has a passing touchdown this weekend, I think Njoku is the guy. And give me over 88.5 yards from scrimmage, so rushing and receiving from DeAndre Swift. That you can find that over at BetMGM. Other books, it's closer to 90, 91. So I like the number there, and the juice is just about the same over at BetMGM. So I like Swift to have a nice day against the Cardinals.
Okay, I like it a lot. The Bo Nix prop is one that I was considering throwing on my card too. I think it's going to be ugly. I think it's going to be an ugly over 218.5. But I don't think Denver is going to be able to run the ball whatsoever. I think it's going to be a high volume day for better or for worse for Bo Nix. I'm looking at Dak Prescott over 264.5 passing yards against Atlanta. This game has the highest total by far of the week. Dallas just cannot run the ball whatsoever. I think they know that at this point. I thought Dalvin Cook would maybe solve that last week, John. And he just didn't. So that was weird. But the Atlanta defense continues to be leaky. Without Evans and Godwin, Still saw Baker Mayfield moving the ball pretty easily on that defense. So I think Dak has a huge afternoon. I don't know if the Cowboys win that game, but I think they're going to have to throw a ton. I like CeeDee Lamb this week as well. I'm taking the under 233.5 passing yards for Jared Goff, who, of course, had 85 passing yards last week. That's not really a part of this, though. Excuse me. I'm looking at the weather, John. You know, I'm here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm not too far from Green Bay, where this game will be played. We're looking at rain. We're looking at relatively cold temperatures throughout the afternoon in Green Bay. It's supposed to be a steady rain all afternoon. This is a late afternoon kickoff. I think this game could be a little sloppy. I've already played the under 48.5 in this game, which feels really dangerous with these two offenses, specifically Detroit, which went over that number by itself last week against Tennessee. But I think we get a sloppy game here. I think the rain impacts both teams. I think if it is Malik Willis starting for the Packers, maybe that's a slight advantage for Green Bay. But I think this is going to have to be a ground-based attack for the Detroit Lions with the weather conditions. So I'll go under 233.5 for Goff. Going back to that Dallas-Atlanta game, Bijan Robinson over 100.5 rushing and receiving yards. Not only could Dallas not run the ball, they also cannot stop the run. They're one of the 3 worst teams in the NFL in terms of rush defense EPA. So I think this should be a very good spot for Bijan Robinson if the Atlanta Falcons just commit to that. Justin Jefferson over 86.5 receiving yards. All the talk in that game is about Joe Flacco taking over, and perhaps rightfully so. This is still a very bad Colts defense, especially against the pass. I'm still clinging to that Jaguars game where they gave up 37 to Jacksonville. I think this should be a great spot for Jefferson and this Minnesota offense to bounce back. They're at home. They have a big rest advantage after playing on Thursday last week. I like David Montgomery. Anytime touchdown, just kind of laid out the case for that with Detroit. And then the sicko prop of the week, John, Taysom Hill. Anytime touchdown, plus 235. He's back healthy. He was in on a blocked punt last week. Alvin Kamara's banged up. You're playing the Carolina Panthers. This just feels like a Taysom Hill spot.
I love it. I'm always in full support of Taysom Hill week. That's a guy that looked like he played football in 1917. Like, he doesn't like the hard shell helmets. He'd prefer to have a leather helmet if he could.
Yeah, he's not wearing a Guardian cap. I'll tell you that. Anti-Guardian cap guy. But yeah, I just have a feeling this is a Taysom Hill week. They tend to come in bunches.